welcome to the first session of day 4 of the Future Law Virtual Summit. Godfrey, are you here? You're on mute. As in every virtual conference, we have to tell people that.
Yes, good morning.
Good morning, Godfrey. Good morning. Good morning, all. We are starting off the top of our day with a session focusing on the African continent. And today we have Mr. Godfrey Ayeranga, who is an advocate from Uganda, and he works at he has experience as an advocate from Thandika and Company Advocates, and I know he works at the university, and he has been doing research in transitional justice, international human rights, international law, legislative drafting. He runs incredible moot courts and focuses primarily in international criminal law as well. Godfrey has been really instrumental in building the global COVID-19 policy response for his country and in producing some research papers. He participated in contributing to a research paper that the UN has singled out and has invited us to continue working on with them in an expert group. He really is a bright and shining star in our community, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce him today to all of you watching here and who will be watching the replays. The topic that we are addressing this morning is law in times of crisis, and we are looking at it from the perspective of some of the most vulnerable people in society on the African continent, with a specific reference to prisoners and prisoners' rights. And thank you and welcome, Godfrey. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Margaret. I am humbled by that introduction. First of all, I want to take this opportunity to thank each and everyone who has made it and accepted our invitation and has made it thus far. So what I'll do is you'll note that one of our panelists, Commissioner Maria, she speaks Portuguese, so I'll have to keep my tone low, try to maintain a low pace as they interpret for her. So in case you see me going slow, just take note that I'm putting in consideration Commissioner Maria Teresa. Now, as you all have heard, my name is Godfrey Ayeranga, and I'm humbled to be part of this great event where I'll be sharing my experience, both as a researcher, but also something I've interfaced with during my legal practice and also during my years of visiting a couple of prisons, both in South Africa, in Uganda, in Kenya, in Namibia, and also in Botswana. So I'm going to be sharing a presentation about the impact of COVID-19 on prisoners' rights in Africa. Now, that will take 15 minutes. And then once that is done, I'll now transition. I'll also be moderating a panel discussion with great, not only scholars, great personalities on the African continent who have put their lives out there to fight to improve the prisoners' rights in this continent. Now, that will take about 1.5 hours. So 1 hour and a half and 30 minutes, let's take it like that. So just take note of that. Now, everyone is asking, why are we this morning talking about prisoners? You may be there asking, do prisoners even themselves have rights? In fact, every time I open my mouth and I start sharing something about prisoners' rights, and this even happened to me last week. I told them that I'm going to be presenting about the impact of COVID-19 on prisoners' rights in Africa, and someone told me, do even prisoners have rights? So for me, that shook me because in this day and age and era, people have not only forgotten that before someone is a prisoner, that person is a human being. That is something I want to say at the beginning of it, that at the back of your mind, just remember that before someone is termed a prisoner, is a human being. Just before someone is termed as a minister, this individual is a human being. Now, in my presentation, it will be in three parts. One, I will distinguish between who is a prisoner and who is a detainee. This is something that is most times confused. And then I'll transition. I will now look at what measures were adopted by states, African states, when there was an outbreak of COVID-19. Now, which measures had a negative impact on the rights of prisoners. Now, after that, I'll proceed and now show some examples of how and what specific rights were violated by the measures that were adopted by the various states. Now, but before I start, I want to ask, just sit there and ask yourself these questions. One, have you ever done anything that if you had been caught, you would have ended in trouble? That is being in conflict with the law. And also ask yourself, was it speeding? Was it drink driving? Was it taking an illegal drug? Or was it taking something that was not even yours? And all these offenses indeed could have got you in conflict with the law. And the second question you should think about is, would you want to be known for the past, for something you've done in the past? Now, unfortunately, that is how we have termed people who have been previously detained, individuals who have found themselves incarcerated. Either they committed the crime or they have been falsely imprisoned. Now, having that in mind, the question now stands, why should we care about the rights of prisoners? Now, before we look at why we should care about the rights of prisoners, the first thing we need to ask ourselves, who are prisoners? And how do we distinguish them from detainees? Now, a prisoner is someone who has been incarcerated by the courts of law. And when we talk about incarcerated, we mean that this person is serving a prison sentence after being convicted by court of law. Now, when it comes to a detainee, a pre-trial detainee, and this is a common story that happens in Africa and across the continent, because most times you'll note that people find themselves detained when they have not been taken to court and they are waiting trial. So all those persons that are waiting trial are the individuals that we call pre-trial detainees. Now, of course, they find themselves forcibly detained because the police officers are waiting to take them to prison. Now, before I transition and talk about why we should care about these prisoners, I am going to ask the tech person to please showcase the video that I shared with you. It's a 2-minute video. It's long, it's 6 minutes, but we're just only going to watch 2 minutes. And I just want to show you a picture of what happens in our prisons. And this should somehow raise your conscience about how we should be able to view these individuals as not only human beings, but also persons that have rights. Robert?
A clap every hour. The signal for prisoners to turn over. Too painful to sleep in the same position. They spend up to 14 hours locked in rooms like this. Meant for 40 people, we found 200. Sleeping on the floor, most don't even have a mat to lie on. It started with a card game for Martin and his friends. Like any 18-year-old, he was enjoying a night out when the police randomly rounded them up. Next thing he knew, he was sent to this prison in Manakara. Martin has not been tried and has never seen a lawyer. Shockingly, he is still here after almost a year. Stories of extreme violence being used by the police are the norm rather than the exception. 60-year-old Marcel and his 2 sons experienced this firsthand. Since arriving here 3 years ago, his son hasn't left the infirmary. He now relies on his father for everything, including taking him to the toilet. Tamara from Amnesty International.
You can stop it there, Robert. Thank you. Now, when you look at that degrading treatment, that in those inhumane circumstances, I ask you a question. Would you want to sleep there for just even 10 minutes? No, let's make it even 5 minutes only. Would you want your sister? Would you want your mother? Would you want your father? Or even your relative to stay there for 2 minutes? Just ask yourself that question. Now, as you ponder, to think and ask yourself, why are these prisoners important? We are not disputing that, yes, they could have committed a crime. That's okay. Let them go to prisons and serve their sentences. However, can they be taken to a place that deserves dignity? And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So I want to encourage you to please stay on this conversation till we put this whole conversation to an end. Now, why should we care about prisoners? You've read a scene that the circumstances in that video showcase you that it is not only degrading, but there's lack of dignity. That is just one example. I mean, if I brought all the videos, you just stop the conversation. Now, first things first, we have said that these prisoners are human beings, even before they are labeled as prisoners. Now, since me and you are human beings, once you go to prison, these rights move with you. Even if you have been denied your right to move freely, your right to liberty, to move around, you don't lose your right to health. You don't lose your right to dignity. You never lose your right to food. You never lose your right to health. And this is what happens. And you find that when you look at Article 5 of the African Charter, it says that every person has a right to dignity. This implies that even prisoners should be granted this right. Now, if you look at the ICCPR, the National Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the same is provided for under Article 7. So then why are we saying that these prisoners do not matter? If we indeed understand that at least they must be accorded dignity. Now, unfortunately, when they are taken to prison to serve their sentences, it's supposed to be for rehabilitation. But what happens? You see what you've just seen in the video, that they will be denied health care, they will be denied good food, they will be denied access to light, and then they find themselves sick and they'll find themselves unable even to hear. You saw the story of the young man who can now not even move and hear and has to get support from the parent. So imagine if the parent was not there, he was going to be in trouble. So now, when you think about all those, the question now we must be asking, that if indeed they are supposed to be detained and be incarcerated to rehabilitate them, yet they are going to face violence, they are going to be beaten, they are going to fall sick, they are going to even end up dying from these prisons. Do you still want to ask me why do prisoners' rights matter? I don't think so. Now, having understood why these prisoners' rights are important, let's look at the measures that were adopted by African states during COVID-19. Most of them included suspension of prison visits in the event or under the guise of stopping the spread of COVID-19. Take an example. In South Africa, on 15th of March, President Cyril Ramaphosa imposed a moratorium on all prison visits. That meant that no one could visit these prisons. We all know that some of these prisoners either get some sugar, some tea leaves from their relatives. They get, some of them even who are sick, they get some medication from their relatives. That means that this was cut short. Furthermore, you will note that these bans included lawyers. They were even denied from accessing their clients. If you look at Tanzania, where President John Magufuli banned indefinitely access to prisons during this period, and the rationale was to curb the spread of COVID. We are not fighting that they should have done that, but look at how these vulnerable individuals were left. They were not taken to court, like in South Africa, where prison authorities were not even taking the prisoners to hear the applications for appeals and bail. So we are seeing a continuous violation of their rights as we go on. Furthermore, in Kenya, just here in Kenya, our neighbor, on 6th of October, there was an outbreak in a Nairobi prison that led to a suspension of prison visits in that prison. Look at Uganda, where I come from. In August, there was an outbreak in Amuru prison in northern Uganda, where the prison authorities, having found that around 153 inmates had contracted COVID-19, had tested positive, they went on and they suspended and even they closed down the prison facilities. Now, look at all those circumstances that were done and were adopted in the guise of preventing COVID. Again, my point is, it's okay, the states had the right to do whatever they had to do, but they should not have underlooked the rights of these prisoners. So what rights were underlooked? One, the right to fair trial and the right to legal counsel. Of course, we've talked about the fact that the prisoners could not access their lawyers and the lawyers could not access them. So this quarantining process and this limited access to the prisons meant that the trials were going to be delayed. It meant that there was not going to be proper preparation, although in countries like Uganda and Kenya and other countries, there was adoption of video conferencing. It also had its own problems because there was issues of internet connectivity. Now you ask yourself, this is an individual that knows has a right, but cannot enjoy it. And one scholar noted that if you have a right and you cannot exercise it, then it is useless. It doesn't gain you, it doesn't benefit you. And that's the predicament you find the prisoners in Africa facing. And that is why at the end of this conversation, we are going to start a debate with Commissioner Maria, asking why hasn't the African continent adopted a treaty, a protocol that guarantees prisoners' rights? We think this is one of the reasons as to why these poor prison conditions are still ongoing in Africa over a decade plus. Notwithstanding that these prisons have been even constructed by the colonialists. Secondly, when you look at Durban in South Africa, on July 8th, as I said earlier on, prison authorities could not take prisoners to court to hear their appeals, and the reason was that they are stopping the spread of COVID. Now, it means that there's a delayed process, there's over piling of these previous cases, and these delays, in one way or the other, congest the justice system. And we know all of us that delayed justice is injustice. So there's continued perpetration of injustice. Now, in Uganda, Chief Justice, the former Chief Justice, Bart Katurebe, came up with guidelines that sought to help in the running of the court system during this period of COVID-19. Of course, at first, they had suspended all the sessions, but with them, there was an easing as the lockdown eased. But then there was an adoption of the video conferencing. But again, people could not even imagine. Just ask yourself, if the lawyers do not have data to access Zoom, how would they even have data to conduct a hearing for their clients? some of these measures were really unreasonable, and they are still unreasonable. And that's why I believe that through such kind of conversations, when we have individuals who have the power to make change, they can be able to speak against all these acts. Look at the right to health that was violated. How? You find that the World Health Organization told us that we must maintain a social distance. We must go on and wash our hands regularly. But you've seen, how do you maintain social distance in that prison? You have over 500 people in one cell, and you are telling them to maintain social distance. It's not possible. How are they going to wash their hands? Yet the supply of soap is dependent on the state. You've cut off the supplies from outside. How shall I wash my hands if the state says there's no money and all the monies are being diverted to be providing care to people who have been contracting COVID-19? So you see a very big challenge here that comes out, that even if you want to maintain social distance and you want to continue washing the hands, it's still very hard. Now, the other right that for me struck me so badly was the right of prevention of torture. Because look at how, first of all, you can't see your relatives. Number two, you don't have good food. Number three, you are sick, you can't be taken to hospital because of these COVID regulations. And now, all that is happening is you're there traumatized. You're asking yourself, what did I do wrong? And this is why we must have this kind of a conversation. So, to sum it up, when you look at the measures that were adopted by the states, we all see that there was a clear-cut violation of the prisoners' rights. So what do we do? That is why proposals like there should be at least release of some prisoners so that they can reduce the congestion have been made. And these measures have been adopted in states like South Africa, where about 19,000 prisoners were released. Ethiopia released 5,600. In Mozambique, we had around 5,000 prisoners released. You go to Ghana, where around 800 prisoners were released. You come to Uganda, surprisingly, where about 2,000 people had qualified to be released. However, listen to this, only 833 were released. Now you ask yourself, what is wrong? What do we do about this problem? That is why, as we go on and transition to the panel discussion, I want to encourage you and to invite you to please stay part of this conversation. If you have any question that you want to pass on to the panel and even to me after this discussion, please use the chat option. We'll be able to respond to them as we shall have a Q&A session at the end. So this is my call to all of you. Please, let us pass this message along, that before someone is a prisoner, someone is a human being. Remember, it can be you tomorrow, it can be a relative. Why we are noting that, if we are in those positions where we can advise the government, let's encourage them to ensure that these rights are protected. You can do a job. You can take part in advocacy like what I'm doing. You can write a piece. You can do a song. You can do a video. You can do a tweet and condemn these actions. Because until we speak up, nothing will change on this continent. And that is why you see that now we are going to have a discussion around why the continent must have a law that governs prisoners' rights. Because now, where we are at, there's no law that binds Uganda to a duty to improve the prison conditions in the country. Perhaps that is the reason as to why these prison conditions are still poor. So I want to end this discussion here, noting that we have limited time. And if you have any questions, any contribution, kindly use the chat option to please go ahead and share your thoughts. And I'll look forward to the Q&A session. And I want to ask that you please hold tight, because now we are changing the driving skill, because now we are going to transition from me presenting to actually having real life discussions about these issues I've talked about. We are going to look at what was the impact of COVID-19 on human rights defenders, dealing with prisoners' rights. We're going to look at what was the impact of COVID-19 on the children who have been detained during this period of COVID-19. What was the impact of COVID-19 on institutions like the African Commission that is supposed to play a key role in ensuring that prisoners' rights are protected? But we know that there was a challenge because of COVID and all these other related challenges. Now, I want to put my presentation to an end at that point, and now move forward to introduce to you the panel that I will be moderating from now to about 11:45 East African time. And I hope that we will keep together from now to the end. Now, the first person I want to introduce to you all, who you must pay key attention to, is Mr. Pascal Kakuru. And Pascal, I don't know if you're in a position to turn on your video so that at least all the participants can be able to see you. Pascal?
There I am.
Okay, so thank you, Mr. Pascal, for coming. So Mr. Pascal Kakuru is a former inmate and he holds an LLB honors. He holds a postgraduate certificate in law, and all this he obtained during his incarceration in Uganda. Furthermore, he's a teacher of law that is now working with justice defenders, and he's a human rights activist around prisoners' rights. Something that is intriguing to me from Mr. Pascal's story is that he never let the past define him. And that's what we are saying. We don't want to be defined by our past. And we should not continue dehumanizing people who have been detained for one reason or the other. So you'll be hearing from Mr. Pascal just a glimpse from him. He will tell us about what grave human rights violations he saw during his time of incarceration and what recommendations he has to the African states, including Uganda, where he comes from. Now, my second panelist, thank you, Pascal. You can turn off the video. I'll come back to you. Thank you, Pascal. So my second panelist will be Karen Saidi. Karen, if you can also turn on your video. So Karen Saidi is originally born in Kenya. She is a lawyer who is very passionate and about effective and innovative partnerships, has conducted pro bono services in the past. And when she completed her degree at the University of London, she developed a keen interest in community law and has previously volunteered as a Christian legal aid researcher, and has gone on to support the poor and marginalized community members to access speedy information through the organization's legal boot camps. Since 2016, Karen has worked on diverse projects with the African Prisons Project. Now, the African Prisons Project is now what transitioned to Justice Defenders, what we call now the Justice Defenders, which is an NGO, an international NGO that deals with advocacy and defending prisoners' rights across the continent. Now, most recently, she has been mobilizing on pro bono support to work with self-represented litigants in remand prisons to help them gain legal empowerment. Karen strongly believes in the power of effective partnerships to make the law a tool for public good. I mean, Karen, this is one of the ways how we are going to make the law a tool that will create change in our society. Excuse me. Now, Karen is also a Commonwealth Legal Education Association member since 2018, and during her tenure, she participated in revolutionizing prison-based legal education through active learning, and Karen's education includes a master's in security studies and criminology from Mountain Kenya, Uganda. So Karen is going to be sharing with us from a perspective of someone who is working with an NGO, a human rights defender dealing with prisoners' rights. What challenges have they faced? What role do these NGOs play in ensuring that prisoners' rights are promoted, are advanced, and there's an improvement to that? Now, the third panelist that I have with me is Ms. Tandeka Koza. Tandeka, I also don't know if you're in a position to turn on your video for our panelists, for our members of the panel, sorry. Tandeka? Okay, so Tandeka Koza, thank you, Tandeka. Tandeka Koza is currently an LLD researcher at the Dula Omal Institute at the University of the Western Cape. She has special interest in children's rights, and her research is around children's rights. So she'll be telling us about what was the impact of COVID-19 on the rights of the juvenile, the children who have found themselves incarcerated by the law, or who have found themselves incarcerated or in conflict with the law. Thank you, Tandeka. Now, on top of that, please stay tight, we are not done. On top of that, we have Mr. Michael Gian Nyako. Michael, can you kindly turn on your videos so at least for the viewers to see you? It's important for, during this period of COVID-19, for the viewers to see the person who is sharing. Now, Mr. Michael Nyako Gian is a Ghanaian lawyer with a decade. Okay, so Mr. Michael is a Ghanaian lawyer with a decade experience on working on several legal and multidisciplinary projects across Africa and beyond. He currently works as the manager, litigation and implementation at the Center for Human Rights at the University of Pretoria. He's also a doctoral researcher at the University of Pretoria. So he's going to tell us, and from his experience, he's had a chance to go to the African court. So he will tell us, what is the problem? Is it that the African court has somehow neglected the rights of prisoners when they are dealing with cases that may have a linkage with prisoners' rights? We shall hear from him. Now, finally, the person I've been waiting to introduce is Commissioner Maria Teresa Manuela. Commissioner Maria, if you can also turn on your video so that we can be able to say hi to you. Okay, so Commissioner Maria Teresa, I'll be very brief. She is the special rapporteur on prisoners, special rapporteur on prisons, conditions of detention and policing in Africa. And this is a mechanism that was created by the African Union. Now, under the auspices of the African Commission. Now, the African Commission is the body that is established under the African Charter, which instrument provides for the rights of African people. Now, this instrument provides for the African Commission, and also it goes ahead under the auspices of the African Commission. It was creation of this Office of the Special Rapporteur on Prisons, conditions of detention, policing in Africa. And then what now they do is that this special rapporteur is supposed to monitor what are the conditions of detention and what are even those prison conditions that are transitioning in the continent during their tenure, and they are supposed to report back and also to review how much the states have done in terms of improving the prison conditions. And she's also responsible with ensuring that she can hold, at least advise the states on how they can improve the prison conditions in Africa. Because of time, I will not go past that. I'll just end it there. And I'll now move to one more person that I cannot, of course, go without introducing. And it was intentional because when you look at the work that Commissioner Maria does and the work that Kirsten has been doing in the past, and Kirsten works with the African Criminal Justice Reform, which is an university-based research institution. Now, Kirsten, she will be now talking to us about what role do human rights-based institutions, including the Dula Omal Institute, have in ensuring that prisoners' rights are guaranteed. And she's engaged and done a lot of writing about decriminalization of petty offenses. And I'm also happy to know that she's part of this great panel. Now, having introduced all my panelists, or our panelists, the first question will now go to Pascal. Pascal, would you please tell us, during your time of incarceration, what 3 key grave human rights violations did you either experience or did you see were happening at the time of your incarceration?
Thank you, Godfrey, and all my fellow panelists present tonight. Can I say good morning? In Uganda, it's good morning. Thank you, Godfrey, for inviting me to be part of this discussion, a very interesting discussion. Godfrey, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Go on. I can hear you. I've just turned off my video, but I can hear you.
Oh, that's great. That's great. You've asked me a very important question. The 3 grave human rights violations that I observed at the time I was incarcerated. Yeah, I was happy when I had your presentation. You were very elaborate, very live, the facts of the violations of human rights as if you've ever been there. So you really simplified my work. You've simplified my work. I'm only going to re-echo what you basically said. For the 14 years really I was in incarceration. Yeah, as I normally tell people, prison is not a holding camp. A lot happens there. Some people call it hell on earth. I don't know how you may term it, but some people have said so. One of the grave, of course, there are many violations of human rights that happens in the African prisons, but one of them is so, of course, disturbing. Is in relation, like the video you just shown us briefly, is the rate of congestion and poor facilities. Prisoners sleeping on one another. At night, you turn after warning one another. We are now turning. You can't turn anyhow, otherwise somebody's going to lose his space where he is covering himself. Some people don't have what to cover themselves overnight. Somebody sleeps on the floor without anything to cover himself, and the night breaks like that. Of course, at times people end up going into toilets where they can have space, but there's no space. One day, of course, I happened to be rid of the prisoners inside there, and it would be tough. Somebody is comfortable to stay or to sleep in a toilet because he fears the kind of congestion, kind of pressure that is in the main residence, the whole of residence. So that's a very dangerous situation, and of course, it's associated with contracting diseases, among other things. Having said that, of course, you know that most of the African prisons, people do hard labor. One of the grave violations of human rights, you mentioned about it, is torture. Yes, I'm glad that in Uganda we have a law that prevents torture, and the Uganda Prison Service has embraced it. But still, there's that kind of element of forcing people to go for labor. Somebody is sick, is not feeling well, maybe has just had medication, but he's drugged, he's pushed, he's flogged, jumped, make sure he goes to dig. And this person that has no energy, maybe he's not disguising or he's not malingering as it's called. But the man is pushed to go and dig, and also beating him the whole day, no food. Somebody comes back when he's tired, just staying on, just working on the whole day on a cup of water. You can imagine what that really means. So that is very grave. And then secondly, of course, that the poor medical facilities. Yeah, the poor medical facilities. Profess somebody sick, can't get medication, maybe he's poor. Like in the days we are in, as you mentioned, the Godfrey and our panelists present, at times people could be supported by their relatives, but now it can't happen. So right now the situation is worse. I know some people may be dying now because they can't access medical treatment. They can't easily move to the medical facilities in the country because of the fear. So that's one of the grave violations of people's rights. That's now limited access to medical attention. And then this obvious one, which I'm going to mention, is about a longer stay on remand or on appeal. Personally, I stayed for 2 years and 3 months and 14 days waiting for my trial in the High Court. Having been tried and sentenced to death, again, I stayed for 7 years without having my appeal heard. So you can now imagine that the right, the due process, that the right access to justice usually is highly violated. Godfrey, maybe to answer your question simply, that's what I can say in the interest of time. Thank you very much. Hope to give some light and some backing of what we really alluded to before. Thank you.
Thank you, Pascal. I mean, I've just been taking note of whatever you've told us, and it's sad that at least the things I've actually mentioned, you've been able to share with us your lived experience, and it shows us that even if this was back then in the past, please note that that video is actually recent. That video was produced by Amnesty International in 2018. So this is recent. So it shows you that these things are actually always, it's the same story. Nothing changes until we do something. I've also heard a story about hard labor, which of course we all know is something that is very common. I've also taken note of the limited access. And then you can imagine now with this COVID-19, what rate it can now be at with the issue of limited access to medical treatment. Thank you so much, Pascal. Now, I want to move to Karen. I'll come back to you, Pascal. I want to move to Karen. Karen, now you've heard what Pascal has told us. So my question to you is, someone like you who engages in advocating for and working with prisoners to ensure that they're empowered, to ensure that they're represented very well. I also know that you've done a couple of trainings to prisoners about their rights. My question to you is, what role do human rights NGOs, especially the ones that deal with defending the rights of prisoners, have to play in this context of COVID-19 to ensure that the prisoners' rights are not only guaranteed, but are protected?
Thank you, Godfrey, for the opportunity to share some best practices and some highlights of the role that NGOs are basically meant to participate in protection of prisoners' rights. I would say in the 21st century, the major role of NGOs is to review and assess the progress made in the field of human rights. And to be specific, different NGOs play different roles within prisons. For example, as justice defenders, our role is, I would say, almost a mediatory role, because we look into ensuring that prisoners are well equipped to defend themselves, basically. We have other NGOs that take up roles such as a social welfare role. We have others that offer counseling. We have others that are watchdogs, basically to make sure that any violations are identified way ahead. We have policy changers. So in a nutshell, I would say that the 21st century NGO is one that looks into investing its time in identification, review of current practices, and enhancement of best practices to protect prisoners' rights in a nutshell.
Okay, thank you. I like the part you brought in when you spoke about that you play a mediator role. Would you please just shed some more light on that?
Sorry, so I'll give you an example of what we've been doing during COVID-19. So we know that during COVID-19, well, there's been a lot of pain across the world. Of course, prisons would be the last place that people would look out to. But as justice defenders, we believe that the wheels of justice need to still keep spinning and turning around. We believe that even if prisons are mostly hidden places, we do not want the voices of the voiceless and injustice to continue. So as justice defenders, we look at equipping prisoners and prison officers with the technical know-how through legal education and through paralegal training to ensure that they're in a position to enhance that access to justice within prisons. So we have beneficiaries who take up a law program through University of London, where they study to become lawyers within prison. So they are themselves the change makers or the driving force to ensure that, well, the prison community has easily accessible people who know the law to help them maneuver the criminal justice system. Despite that, we also have, we conduct paralegal trainings for both prisoners and prison officers to ensure that they have the necessary skills to be able to, well, educate others and they themselves to defend themselves while they navigate the criminal justice system. So that's why I was saying that we play almost like a mediatory role, making sure that we empower prisoners and prison officers with the necessary skills to enhance the fight towards access to justice of they themselves within prisons.
Thank you. I must commend you. Thank you so much. And I mean, if you are looking to play a key role in ensuring that the prison, because one thing that is interesting is that you note that it is not that these prison wardens or prison officers do not know the law. They actually know the law, but sometimes they pretend like they are forgotten. Or need we say, and someone always said that repetition is important, because the more you repeat, the more you practice. So we need to always remind these prison officers of their duties. We need to remind them of their obligations. So thank you so much, Karen, and that's some good work that is being done, because I like the element you spoke about, that you ensure that the prisoners themselves can be able to actually stand out and speak on behalf of the others once they go through the law program. And I'm also happy to note that Mr. Pascal has noted to me earlier on, as I told you, all of you, that he's a beneficiary of that program. And at least now you can see the benefits of that, that he's been able now to come out and stand out to fight for the prisoners' rights. And the other issue about conducting paralegal trainings, which is where my second question will come for you, Karen, and then I'll transition to Tandeka. Karen, so what challenges have you faced as an organization, as a person, in conducting these kind of legal trainings? Because I know there's always issues dealing with accessing these prisons and all these other challenges.
So, well, it's quite easy to conduct paralegal or any sort of training when you're outside. But when it comes to prisons, the first thing that comes to mind is that, well, this is a custodial, or I would say, yeah, it's a security institution, so security comes first. So, and everything else follows after. Despite, for instance, Uganda prisons and Kenya Prison Service having the open door policy where they invite different NGOs and other non-state actors to support in the rehabilitation of prisoners, there's still the element of security comes first. So for instance, if there's I would say a riot and you're in the middle of a class, then the class has to stop. I would say if that's the best example, I would say for security comes first, meaning it interferes with the implementation of any specific program. If, the other issue that we come about with is community marginalization. So upon the release of prisoners, we have found that through our studies that individuals are not able to reintegrate back into society as fast as we thought that they would be. Why? Because there's that mentality that the community still maintain of this person was in prison. So either they have been radicalized within prisons or they haven't reformed, which doesn't necessarily portray the truth about the situation, because some of these individuals, for instance, we have someone who was found in possession of coffee. Some of them are non-criminal offenses, which really you have been forced to commit that non-criminal offense because of circumstances of life. poverty, for instance. Then the other biggest challenge that we have as NGOs, especially like justice defenders, is no one wants to invest in the criminal justice field. Why? Because they feel that that is not so important. There are other more important things that someone can invest in. For instance, building dams, for instance. So someone would prefer investing in building a dam or supporting with cancer rather than supporting women with children behind bars. Why? Because it doesn't make financial sense to an individual to support someone who is perceived to have committed an offense, whether they are guilty or not guilty. Just the fact that they're within the criminal justice system reduces the chances of them having any support from anyone out there. So NGOs that operate within the criminal justice system have basically a serious funding gap. No one wants to invest in them. So the little finances or the little goodwill that we are able to obtain from the people who believe in the criminal justice cause is not enough to support or sustain the development towards keeping the wheels of justice spinning. There's also an issue of mentality. People within the state themselves don't believe that, for instance, if it's e-justice, you'll find that there's I would say a selection or a selective application of the use of video conferencing, for instance, in Uganda, where we'll see that if you have money, then you'll be first on the list to possibly have the opportunity for your case to proceed. Why? Because the state itself is also not having enough financial manpower to be able to effectively execute its role in upholding prisoners' rights. So yeah, it's a mixture of many things, I would say. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Wow, that has been insightful. I mean, my takeaway, number one, we need to invest so much in these prisons, especially, first of all, in the prisons, but also we need to invest so much in the people who are doing some change. So please, if you're out there and you're asking yourself, I have these monies in the bank, I've just won a jackpot, where can I take this money? Please don't waste it. Look for someone who is doing cause that is seeking to improve another person's livelihood, lifestyle. And please donate, feel free to donate. If you, I mean, some of us may have those resources. There's no harm in that. You can go and donate even, it can be, if you have a business that deals with the papers, ream of papers, let's say, you can donate the reams because they may need them even to draft some documents, to give to the prisoners and the materials that they're using for training. There's so much you can do. You have so much potential out there. You just need to tap it. The other thing that came out for me was that a big challenge is the issue of community marginalization. And I also hold that same experience because everywhere I've gone and I've been asking and saying that I want to talk about prisoners, I want to talk to prisoners, they've been telling me, those people, do they even have rights? So the community thinks that they don't even have rights. So we have a big role to play in changing this attitude that is negative. All right, now I want to move to Tandeka Koza. And Tandeka, my question to you is, from your research, what have you seen as the grave impact of COVID-19 when it comes to the rights of these juvenile, the children who have found themselves in conflict with the law? Something you can share with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Godfrey. I think that before we can even discuss the impact of COVID-19 on juvenile justice, it's important to actually just discuss it generally, because then you'll see that there's actually been a trend of violence which existed pre-COVID-19 and has just simply persisted. So Article 17 of the African Children's Charter is the provision which protects juvenile, children in conflict with the law. And basically it says that they're entitled to special treatment. Those in custody must not be subjected to torture, must be kept separate from adults. The aims of their remand or their detention are reformation, integration, and rehabilitation. And there should also be a minimum age, which is undefined for remand, that is. So juvenile justice refers to the entire process from commission or allegation of a crime to the trial to the sentence to the serving, right? So regarding COVID-19 at the allegation stage, there have been some delays, as Karen also mentioned, relating to adults. It's also happened to children. There have been some delays in coming to trial. So therefore they were remanded for longer periods. So the time between when they are arrested and when they come to a court has been extended. Because of these delays, because of the moratorium here in South Africa, but it's not only South Africa. So this is a violation of Articles 17.1 and 17.2. At the trial stage, this was also inevitably delayed for people who were in remand pre-COVID-19 and those who were taken into remand during COVID-19, the lockdown period. So that's also been delayed because of the new systems that have been put in place, the new justice systems, as well as temporary closures of the courts and any other affiliated, for example, NGOs who will take up cases. So these have led to backlogs in the court's roles, and there's no special treatment for, okay, this is a case concerning a child, so this should be pushed to the front or anything like that. So there have been backlogs and children have also been affected by this. So this is also a violation of Articles 17.1 and 2. At the sentencing stage, if it is separate from the trial stage, which it often is, then the delays at the sentencing stage are also inevitable. So this is a violation of Article 17.2. Finally, at the stage when the child serves their sentence, for those children who had already been sentenced before COVID-19, there are potential health risks connected to overcrowding, as we saw in the video, and schooling activities and rehabilitation activity programs have also come to a halt or have also been delayed. So there's also a violation of Article 17.3. So none of these issues actually are new. They've just been exacerbated by COVID-19. And the other thing is that, juvenile delinquency might have also gone up during this time because children are out of schools. So it was actually, we were preparing for that. Here in Africa, as well as in the United States, they predicted a peak in juvenile delinquency during this time.
Wow. Thank you, Thandeka. Now, and something has cut through as a thread. Delay, 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 delay. From the beginning to the end. And this is sad because it shows us that indeed, no one seems to be caring. No one seems to be interested about these children's rights. But then my question to you as I move to Kirsten is, then as a scholar and a human rights defender, as you are, what strategy, what advocacy strategies and tactics would you then rather give to human rights defenders and scholars like yourself to adopt to ensure that at least there's increased advocacy around the rights of these children during this period and even in the future?
So like Karen was saying earlier on, that the space is very saturated. There aren't actually a lot of people, for whatever reason and whatever position they hold, there aren't a lot of people speaking on criminal justice. And then there are even less people speaking on juvenile justice. So we need to first of all garner interest within the existing space to deal with juvenile justice, because it seems as though there's no one really focusing on juvenile justice. For example, in South Africa, I know only one NGO that deals with juvenile justice. And the judge inspector for correctional services, who is in charge of, so it's an old constitutional judge, a retired constitutional judge, sorry, who's now in charge of inspecting correctional services. During my time with them, I had no interaction with juvenile justice at all, and it seems as though they don't take that as seriously as they take the other cases. It might be that there are more, it might be because there are more adults, but that still doesn't mean that children don't need protection. They actually need more protection, and the fact that there's less of them should mean that we have more resources for them. So we need to, one of the things I think is that we need to start with the small feats. So there are a lot of things that are very problematic, but we need to start with the small things, get the governments warmed up. So like one of these is separating children and adults. because a lot of prisons don't separate children from adults, and it's because of overcrowding. And then we also need to repeal the life sentence because, you know, we need to work from separating and then go bigger and bigger and bigger up to repealing a life sentence for children. We also need to have collaborations. We need to foster collaborations with organizations who can help to fund building separate prisons or home or custody centers. We need to, if governments could rather have home or custody centers, you know, as opposed to having juvenile centers, that might also help. And if we can collaborate for the building of those with NGOs, that would be great. And then we also need collaboration for the investment in and creation of much needed educational and rehabilitation programs. So we don't only need justice defenders in the field of criminal justice or juvenile justice, we also need those people to create collaborations with people who are interested in the right to education and, you know, anything else that is attached to rehabilitation. So basically, we need a lot of collaboration.
Wow. Thank you, Thandeka. I hope all of you are writing because I'm serious writing. And I know at the end of this conversation, I'm going to make a call for those who are interested in us even taking this conversation to another step where we can see how do we even put whatever we've discussed to paper, put it to practice. So we need to start thinking about how we can collaborate with justice defenders, how we can collaborate with African Criminal Justice Reform and the African Commission and all these other persons. Thank you so much, Thandeka. Now, speaking of collaborations, I want to move to you, Kirsten. Now that you deal with, you work with a research-based institution, that is the African Criminal Justice Reform, that is embedded within the Dulomal Institute, that is a research-based institution at the University of the Western Cape. So my question is, as we talk about these collaborations, what role do you now think that individuals engage with research? How can you collaborate with your research and how can you bring your skills to the table to at least ensure that we have continued advocacy around prisoners' rights? Kirsten?
Thank you very much, Godfrey. Yeah, so this is a very important conversation that we are having today. One of the, hello, can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. So research-based institutions and NGOs across the continent have a very important role to play in advancing the rights of prisoners on the continent by using the existing research or advocacy strategies and objectives to engage various role players to strengthen the rights of prisoners by using, for example, identifying loopholes in legislation that does not protect prisoners' rights completely, you know, identifying all those weaknesses and coming together using the advocacy strategies to collaborate with role players or NGOs within the same sector and to engage parliamentarians on these issues. And then also to interrogate legislation that does not offer or promote the protection of prisoners' rights by engaging the parliamentarians, engaging governmental institutions on these shortcomings. And then also offering assistance to various state actors in terms of drafting appropriate legislation or amending legislation or advising on the amendment of legislation to advance prisoners' rights. And then there's obviously another role that strategic litigation can also, where that can come into play, where state actors or parliamentarians are not willing to step up because prisoners' rights are not actually prioritized continentally. And so this is where we would then collaborate and engage other NGOs that are involved in strategic public litigation to take on the task of engaging the courts on these issues. Look, it might be a bit more problematic in terms of states that don't have strong constitutions or do not uphold democratic values. But there are ways in which one could also step up, take the step up and engage African Commission and create panel discussions and have conversations with key role players to talk about these problems that business face.
Thank you, Kirsten. I'm going to come back to you. You mentioned a very important point that takes me to Mr. Michael Nyako. But one thing that I've taken out from your conversation is that we need to use, to ensure that we use these research advocacy strategies to ensure that we engage other persons, other stakeholders, our parliaments, NGOs that are conducting the same research. We need to engage other advocates that are dealing with public interest litigation. We need to now take another positive step, which is strategic litigation. And now this now takes me to Mr. Nyako, because Michael, I know thank you, Kirsten. Michael, I know you've done a couple of litigation around issues dealing with human rights on the continent, especially going before the African Court. Now, my question to you is, how effective, now that we've talked about the importance of strategic litigation, how effective do you think strategic litigation before national and regional courts around prisoners' rights can play in advocating prisoners' rights? Michael?
Thank you very much for that question, Godfrey. And I think Kirsten perhaps mentioned the importance of collaboration and the ability to use different strategies in advocacy. And I think strategic litigation is perhaps a very important arsenal in any advocacy strategy. And the reason being that litigation has a certain coercive force, that when you engage in, more non-adversarial conversation with state actors like parliamentarians or, national governments who have the power to change policy or practice in ways that are important to protecting the rights of prisoners, then perhaps if that is not working, or if you're not getting the desired responses, then litigation becomes the obvious choice, the use of courts, both at the domestic, but also international human rights mechanisms such as the African Commission, the African Court, or the other UN treaty bodies, as a means of first getting remedies for the persons who are immediately impacted by these kinds of unfair prison conditions, or sometimes blatant violations, but also allowing the institutions to elaborate on exactly what the nature of these rights are. So it's perhaps not only about an immediate relief for the person or the group of individuals who are impacted directly, but also allowing the institutions to guide governments on what exactly the obligations are and what exact measures that they need to take when it comes to the issue of prisoners' rights. Quite unfortunately, I think in Africa generally, there's very limited human rights litigation to begin with. So even for issues that one would think are, quite popular, like children's rights and stuff like that, there's very limited litigation. So it's a bit.
And sorry, Michael, is this because, is it because of the approach that the African court themselves have decided to take? Because we know there are cases like the Konate case, cases that have actually had a linkage with prisoners' rights, which we think that the court should have said that there was a violation of Konate's right to fair hearing, not only fair hearing for the prisoners, but also the issue dealing with the right to food and health. But then we see that the court is very quiet, it's only tied to an issue of the fair hearing that was taken to court and the criminalization of these all issues of freedom of expression, yet the court could have done more. What do you think?
I mean, I think for me, I would be very slow in putting the blame at the doorsteps of the court per se, because I mean, as a judicial institution, they have certain constraints in how they can, hand down remedies depending on what exactly is the nature of the complaint is brought before it. So, for instance, you mentioned the Konate case, and in that Konate case, there was actually a precautionary measure that the court ordered that whilst Mr. Konate was incarcerated, and his trial before the African court was pending, he needed medical attention because his health was deteriorating, and the prison authorities were not allowing him access to see his doctors. So the court actually did make an order for the state to allow him to see his doctors. But I think perhaps we might not have seen a lot of, if you like, positive engagement with prisoners' rights per se before the African court is the nature of complaints that. So you might be aware that there are a lot of cases involving prisoners before the African court, especially concerning Tanzania. And
yes.
Many of these cases are framed as fair trial cases. So it is not the exact nature of the incarceration that is usually attacked in concluding trials. It is the inability to obtain, records of a trial or for appeal purposes. It is other, if you like, fair trial-based critiques of judicial mechanisms in states. That is usually the focus of litigation before the African court. And perhaps it is about time that we more at substantive rights litigation, such as the health conditions, the overcrowding, and many nations deteriorate because there is, as has already been mentioned, long pretrial detention. And the court has held in many instances that prolonged trials are actually a violation of the right to fair trial. We should be thinking of using this jurisprudence as a means of, holding decongest reasons by either fast tracking the trial process so that the people don't stay a long time in pre-trial detention, or to make bail conditions quite reasonable, especially when it is not an offense that involves, violence or that, the individual is of grave danger to the community. And I will give an example. I mean, there are a lot of show there are a lot of people who end up in pre-trial detention for so-called petty offenses, like loitering or so-called vagrancy laws. That does not really define a specific crime per se. It's just you're seen as, for want of a better expression, because many criminal codes have this, you are a vagabond of some sense, that you're not using your time, and that may end you in detention in many instances. And I think the kinds of laws that we should be using the African court to challenge.
Okay, thank you, Michael. You've been very eloquent and you've made some good points. Especially what I've taken from you is that we need to be very careful, even as we go to the court, that we should frame these complaints that seek to ask the court to actually not only elaborate on the rights of the prisoners that have been violated, but also we should use these courts and these institutions to ensure that these complaints that are framed, they look at ensuring that there's more advancement, and there's more pronouncement from the court coming and saying that there's this right to health was violated. The obligations of the states with this right deal with A, B, C, D. Thank you, Michael. I will come back to you, Michael, but then I want to move to Commissioner Maria, because now we are talking about now the role of the courts, these other mechanisms like the African Commission that have a role to ensure that prisoners' rights are now protected. So, Commissioner Maria, my question to you will be, and again, thank you for sparing time to come and join this conversation. For us, we are humbled. So my question is now to you that, what role does the African Commission, and I know you can speak about so much, but you can limit it maybe to three, you highlight maybe three of them, the role that the African Commission and these supernatural bodies that the African Union has created, including the court, have to play in ensuring that the rights of prisoners are maintained and protected. And you can also share with us your experience with how much progress has been made with respect to the prisoners' rights. Thank you. So you just be patient as they translate for Commissioner Maria, everyone. kindly just be patient.
Obrigada, Godfrey.
Yes.
Okay, so we start by saying thank you for the question, Godfrey.
Pela questão
Pode continuar, sim.
e pelo facto de ser uma das últimas pessoas a falar, o que é muito bom, porque tive a oportunidade de ouvir todas as outras intervenções.
I appreciate the fact that I'm the last one to speak because I had a chance to listen to everyone and make my point and be able to better build my answers.
Em relação ao papel da Comissão para garantir e proteger os direitos das pessoas presas ou detidas,
when it comes to the role of the African Commission in ensuring the progressive protection and advancement of prisoners' rights,
mais concretamente na fase de julgamento, que é aquela fase em que se vai verificar se efetivamente, desde o momento da detenção, os países observaram rigorosamente todas as leis, e se existem leis para observar e para proteger os direitos dos detidos.
So more specifically, of course, in this pre-trial phase that we are discussing, which is a very important phase, because this is the moment that we see if the countries or states are ensuring that laws are being followed.
Devo dizer que o papel da Comissão começa muito antes para permitir que o prisioneiro não seja prejudicado por um dos princípios principais, que é o julgamento justo e célere. E isto consta da Carta Africana.
The role of the African Commission starts way before the trial even begins, because it's the role of making sure that the prisoner gets a fair trial, but also is totally entitled to all the rules and law that he as a citizen has got in his in right.
Começamos por verificar se os prazos foram cumpridos e se o prisioneiro teve direito à assessoria jurídica para que ele possa compreender o que efetivamente se passa em sua volta, se é inocente ou mesmo que seja culpado, se tem condição de se defender.
So the first point that they start looking at is obviously if the roles and the process were done within all the legalities, and if the prisoner has got the right access to all the information and the legal defense, either being innocent, if that is assessed beforehand, or if is in fact obviously guilty.
Também a Comissão trata de se certificar se, feito o julgamento, foram efetivamente observados os princípios necessários e se a decisão está de acordo com as leis, tanto nacionais como as cartas regionais e internacionais que regem os direitos humanos e dos prisioneiros em particular.
We also look at the fact that even if there was a trial after that, if that trial was obviously in guidance with all the laws and the constitution within the African regulations or state.
E por último, se o Godfrey verificar caso o cidadão tenha sido lesado em algum desses momentos e feita a justiça, mesmo assim entender que continuam sendo violados os seus direitos, é uma das condições exigidas pelo artigo 56 da Carta Africana para que ele possa intentar uma ação contra o Estado que violou os seus direitos.
And then lastly, another point is in case there was obviously a violation in the legal process, according to Article 56 of the African letter, the prisoner has got the right to obviously follow that procedure and put in practice the legal process after that. So those are all the roles of the African Commission in those points.
Okay. Thank you. So I know we have at about 25 minutes to go. So I'll ask you, Commissioner, the last question before I ask one final question to all the panelists and then open up the floor. Commissioner, I just want to ask you, it's one question, but there are two embedded. One, what progress has the Office of the Commissioner, the Office of the Special Rapporteur on Prisoners' Rights in Africa made with respect to ensuring that, I know you've told us these rules, but are there like explicit examples that have been done where the Commission has stepped in and also been able to assist these prisoners? That is one. Two, what are the obstacles? And you can respond to that in about 5 minutes or less than that. So what obstacles do you also face while performing your job of ensuring that the states not only promote but protect prisoners' rights during this period? Thank you.
Thank you, Godfrey. I'm just going to translate. Just give me 1 minute.
Okay, as they do the translation, whoever has a question to any of the panelists, please use the chat option. You can choose to indicate your name and then the person you're addressing your question to, so that at the time when we open up the floor, which should be shortly, we can be able to have them respond to those questions. Yeah. Thank you. And please let the Commissioner that she only has 5 minutes to respond. At least we are short of time.
Obrigada, Godfrey. Devo dizer que o meu mecanismo tem tido intervenção em muitos casos que chegam à Comissão Africana, relatados por nossos parceiros, principalmente pelos nossos parceiros, e que permitiram que fossem emitidas cartas de apelo aos governos para que pusessem termo à violação de direitos humanos. Muito rapidamente.
Só um minuto.
Sim.
Thank you, Godfrey. One of the ways that have been that the Commission has been being able to step in was by receiving letters by prisoners in highlighting violations of their process, which they have been able to then move forward, and she'll highlight the rest. Pode continuar.
Devo dizer que houve problemas em países onde houve motins nas prisões porque os prisioneiros não tinham informação bastante acerca das questões relacionadas com o Covid e rebelaram-se porque o Estado queria mantê-los naquela condição. E a Comissão Africana teve que apelar para que os Estados criassem condições e informassem os detidos e prisioneiros sobre a Covid-19 para evitar mais mortes, porque naquela prisão houve 2 mortes de prisioneiros e houve também uma morte de um agente prisional.
For example, one of the reasons is during the COVID-19 there were a lot of riots in the prisons. So one of the roles that the African Commission had to put in place was to reach out to governments to make sure that practices of safety would be put in place in the prisons. Because the prisoners were rioting against, obviously, the lack of those safety measures and sanitary procedures. So it was the role of the African Commission to reach out and make sure those were put in place. So these riots actually resulted in some deaths. Had not the African Commission obviously stepped in, those could have been bigger numbers, of course.
Isto foi exatamente na Serra Leoa, dos exemplos que posso trazer e que foi público.
And one of these examples was in Sierra Leone, that it was a public incident, that it was made public.
A outra intervenção do meu mecanismo foi emitir as declarações para que os governos pudessem tomar em linha de conta mais próxima a observância dos princípios e das diretrizes de Luanda, exatamente porque em tempo de Covid era muito mais difícil a proteção dos prisioneiros.
Another way that the African Commission has decided to take was to make sure that the declarations that were made in Luanda were made public so that the other governments could follow through and they could see as an example.
Okay. And what obstacles did the commissioner experience during this period, and also when she's doing her job? Perhaps if she can wrap up with that, that would be good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Maria, passamos para a outra questão que é quais foram os obstáculos que encontrou?
Muito bem, muito bem. Obstáculos há muitos. E se o Godfrey reparar, se os colegas do painel repararem, estas questões que são levantadas agora já vêm de muito tempo. Mais concretamente, devo falar do Seminário Internacional sobre Condições de Detenção em África, que se realizou em 1996, em Kampala. Todas estas questões que hoje estamos abordando já tinham sido vistas e foi por essa razão que foi nomeado um relatório especial para as prisões e as condições de detenção na Comissão Africana.
So Godfrey, obstacles are many, and there have been many obstacles for many years. So the commissioner highlights that all these issues that we've been discussing today, they've been discussed in 1996 in Kampala. And one of the reasons and one of the ways that the government have found to try to tackle this was to create a special reporter, which is her role, to be able to delegate and discuss these matters.
Em relação a outros obstáculos atuais, nos contactos que temos tido com os governos em relação às condições nas prisões, e principalmente nesta época de pandemia, a principal que tem sido referenciada é a falta de condições financeiras para que os governos possam criar melhores condições para os prisioneiros.
So, and then talking about other obstacles and when reaching out to different governments, you know, what the Commission has found out is the most common reason, and it's always coming back to them, is the lack of financing to be able to provide to each prison to facilitate the conditions.
Okay, thank you so much.
Também temos tido, minuto só, temos tido problema com o rastreamento nas prisões, a detecção e o tratamento da doença, onde ela já está declarada, tanto para os prisioneiros como para os serviços prisionais.
Lastly, now because of COVID, you know, during this pandemic, one of the issue that they've been dealing with is obviously the tracking and testing of the COVID-19 to be able to not only detect it within prisons, but also to be able to treat it and stop it from spreading within prisons.
Okay, obrigado. Thank you so much, Commissioner Maria. Indeed, it's been a huge insight for us to learn from your work and what you've been able to do. And it's still sad that we are still facing some of these challenges, issues of funding. But I must commend you for the work you are doing with respect to the element of tracking and ensuring that these prisoners, even they are able to be treated, because that's a big problem. Because in my former paper, I wrote that at least states should ensure that before a prisoner leaves the prison, they are checked and they ensure that they are free from COVID. And even those who are coming to prison, they are free from COVID, because then that sometimes brings a problem to the whole community. Thank you so much. Okay, so I now want to ask one question to all of you that will cut across all my panelists, and then I'll open up the floor in the next 2 minutes. So the question I want to ask each one of you, and I'll start with you, Commissioner Maria, before now I go back to everyone, is now that we've seen that there's a problem, do you think, as the Commissioner, the Special Rapporteur on Prisoners' Rights in Africa, someone who's in charge to protect and ensure that the rights of these prisoners are protected, is this a time that now we actually need a treaty or a protocol that deals with prisoners' rights to ensure that these rights, as Michael said, can be able to be properly litigated upon? Because we don't have any law in Africa that binds these states to the obligations to ensure that the prison conditions are protected. I know for a fact that there was a treaty that had been drafted, but it was shelved. So maybe you can even give us a brief about what happened to that protocol that have been drafted, and has there been progress to ensure that this is revived, because this is a big problem. You could respond to that in at least 2 minutes so we can have everyone say something. So the question to everyone is that, at least all the panelists, do you think that at this point we've seen these grave breaches happening? Is this a time that we need a protocol that deals with these rights, at least so that we can be able to advance and hold the states accountable? Or are there other mechanisms we can take? Let's please stick to the time so that we can open up the floor soon. Eh?
Está bem, começo por responder.
Sim.
Penso que a existência de um protocolo para a África, eu remetia para uma das painelistas que dizia, acho que é a senhorita, deixa ver, Kristen, que dizia que a África temos problemas com as instituições. As instituições não são fortes, e por não serem fortes, por mais leis que a gente tenha, fica difícil a implementação, porque não há vontade, também foi dito por um dos painelistas, não há vontade política para poderem, quererem implementar isto. Eles até podem assinar, até podem ratificar, mas dali até colocar em prática é um problema. Em relação à existência concreta do protocolo, traduza só, Margarida, por favor.
Sim. So the commissioner starts by saying that the existence of protocol, although exciting and promising, it goes back to a point that Kristen has made as well, that is, people are reluctant to the idea. So it's the social mentality of how to impose this protocol. So even though protocols would be created and they could be in laws and writing, in order to change people's mentality, that is one of the difficulties. But then moving forward, pode continuar.
Então, não é que não seja necessário um protocolo, mas devemos começar, todos aqueles que estamos interessados nos direitos dos prisioneiros, devemos começar por convencer e empurrar os chefes de Estado e de governo para que revejam se a Convenção de Kampala teve ou não teve aplicação nos seus respectivos países. Se não, o que é que impediu que fosse aplicada? Só no final é que vamos verificar que tipo de outro instrumento legal, como um protocolo ou outra coisa qualquer, onde traríamos já uma súmula da aplicação daquilo que eles próprios decidiram em Kampala.
So it's not that a protocol is not needed and it's not important, it is, but as the Commission says that firstly, we should start looking at making sure that the government officials understand and inform us activists on why the Kampala Convention, for example, was not put in place and why did that not work out. And once all the government officials have come together and have understood what are the issues in making sure that those rights are not put in place, then the protocol can be created.
Okay, but
rapidamente, Sr. Godfrey, por último, verificar que a Comissão Africana já tem 2 protocolos sobre os idosos e sobre, acho que há 2 protocolos que estão pendentes por falta de assinatura, porque os Estados não querem se comprometer.
And then lastly,
mesmo de fundo.
Lastly, another point that the Commission makes is, even though, for example, there are already 2 protocols with that the African Commission has put in a motion that they've created and drafted, but the governments are reluctant to sign because they don't want to have, like you said, Godfrey, the binding obligations to make them act, and they have to. So those are all the challenges that why a drafted protocol is still not yet.
Okay. Obrigado, Commissioner Maria. Thank you. Now, we've heard that at least it's important from the Commissioner's view for us to have a protocol that binds the states. The only problem we have is the lack of the will of the states. So we have a role to ensure that we encourage our states, continue advocating for this protocol. Let's continue the debate that at least states can tell us as to why they don't want to be held. Of course, we know they don't want to be held liable because they want to always use this as a loophole to continue their impunity. But let's keep on pushing. Now, I want to go to you, Michael, and then I go to Tandeka in that manner. Michael, what are your thoughts? In 1 minute, what are your thoughts about this protocol?
Thank you, God. Thank you, God. I think surely, I mean, a protocol adds a certain layer of certainty, ascribe specific rights concerning, you know, the treatment of prisoners. But I don't think it's the ultimate solution in itself, because what a protocol will essentially do is to elaborate on what exactly the obligation of the state is when it comes to a prisoner's rights to health, education, or environment within which are rights that human rights treaties and which international courts and mechanism already made pronouncements on. So surely it would be an ideal situation. It will be an ideal situation if you had a separate protocol that actually did have specific elaboration on rights, because as we have seen from other situations when it comes to children's rights, you could say that the African Charter, for instance, protects many of the rights that are in the Children's Charter per se. But because states are usually complicit in not treating people equally, the elaboration of specific rights in particular treaties perhaps is an important route to take. For the potential of having a treaty, litigators just have to be strategic in using what rights already exist. I mean, if the situation in a prison is in violation of the prisoner's rights to health because you're not being able to access hospital or health services, or that they don't get adequate food, or that there's not enough space in these prisons to accommodate the overcrowded numbers, perhaps we can still use the existing human rights treaties and mechanisms, but we just have to find clever ways of drafting our reliefs and being very specific about the kind of reliefs that we want from a particular judicial or quasi-judicial mechanism.
Okay, thank you. I see we have less than 5 minutes to go, so we need to wrap up this. How about you, Tandeka? What do you think?
I share the same sentiments as Commissioner Maria, that if we have a protocol, we run the danger of having the instrument but not having it being supported by state parties, and I base that on the current attitudes. So I think that we need to work on the current attitudes of the different governments first. And we need to raise awareness of criminal justice and juvenile justice first. Specifically relating to children, I don't think that we need to add something in addition to the African Children's Charter. I think that the provisions in the African Children's Charter are fine, although Article 17 or elsewhere in the Charter, it's Article 5.3, prohibits the death sentence, the death penalty, but it doesn't prohibit, the Charter is silent on life imprisonment for children. However, I think that that is something that can still be argued, and the repealing of those sentences can be where they are still implemented, which is not, I think I checked, it was 3 countries in Africa still allow it. One of them has, de facto abolished it. So that we can use, although it's not protected explicitly in the Charter, we can use the other provisions such as right to life, right to development as well to argue against it. So I don't think an additional children, juvenile justice charter is necessary. Regarding a prisoner's charter, I don't think that it's a good move right now because of the current, attitudes towards criminal justice.
Okay, thank you, Tandeka. Karsten, what do you think? Briefly, we have less than 5 minutes to go, so at least I have to give chance to 1 or 2 of people in the, who are viewing this to be able to share comment or 2. Kirsten?
Yeah, so I agree with Commissioner Manuela. I thought about this quite carefully. There won't be enough political will to ratify a charter. However, one possibility exists is in the form of, and also we do have the right to dignity and to be free from torture, including humane and degrading treatment. And this is also noted within the Women's Protocol and also the Children's Charter. So one possibility could exist is in the form of a general comment, just to basically clarify the state's responsibilities in terms of those rights to enhance prisoners' rights. So that's one possibility that exists. Thank you.
Thank you. I hope Commissioner Maria, you've taken note of that. That's a very brilliant idea that the African Commission should think about coming up with a general comment that clarifies the state's obligations with respect to prisoners' rights. That would be very brilliant. Thank you, Kirsten. How about you, Karen? And then I go to Pascal briefly, then we can wrap it up.
In my opinion, we already have existent. For instance, we have the Bangkok rules, but because of the resources restraints, we find that really it doesn't work like the way that it should be operating. So I agree with the panelists that there needs to be one, political will and leadership, and there has to be a need of generally a holistic reform of the prisons. I also want to highlight that as people in the civil society, we need to start behaving abnormally, meaning that COVID-19 came, yes, it highlighted issues that were already existent, systemic issues that were already existent. So that in itself shows that the problems were there, but now because of COVID, they were amplified. So ideally, like Justice Defenders, what we did is that we took it up because we want to proceed in enhancing access to justice. We took it up and said that, you know what, we still need to continue training. So we work together with Uganda Prison Service and Kenya Prison Service to push forward our virtual digital justice mechanisms. So yes, as CSOs, we need to behave abnormally so that we are able to keep bridging the systemic gap that is within the criminal justice system.
Thank you. My takeaway from is that we need to work out, find a way how we can actually take use of the virtual space to continue doing our work in advancing the prisoners' rights. Pascal? And then after Pascal, I'll open up the floor for 2 contributions because of time. Whoever has a question, a comment, to please raise it. Thank you. Pascal?
Thank you, Godfrey, and all the panelists. My take is slightly different from my fellow panelists regarding to having a specific human rights regional treaty or convention or protocol, whatever the case may be. Me and you all know that matters of human rights, matters of soft law, matters of goodwill and cooperation among the states. If states have been moved, have been convinced to sign other specific human rights treaties or protocols, why not for prisoners? I know this one may not take, of course, a short while. It is a long-term plan, but the fact remains we need to have a specific regional human rights treaty or protocol that will in the long run address these issues of prisoners. I agree with you on the side that yes, we need to convince, to lobby and bring these states on board to accept this, true, but the bottom line is we need the protocol in the long run. On the other hand, I need to take note that we need more funding to the prisoners. We need more funding to the prisoners. Some of these violations talking about as a result of poor funding. Our prisoners are taken as second or third class citizens who are always not considered. So more funding if it is done, it would be great. Coupled with training on matters of human rights to the custodians, intensive and in cooperation and embedding into the training course, matters of human rights will also do great to make sure we improve on the standards of the human rights. Not forgetting the issue of the more international human rights bodies, the civil society organization, continue lobbying, continue raising constant the masses, the government, the states, the operatives on matters of prisoners' rights. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I have noted that you've stated what I said, that we need a specific protocol. Even if we need to do a lot of lobbying, we should not forget that idea. but also we need to have more funding with issues dealing with prisons. And also you mentioned that we need to have more training of the custodians, and also these international human rights bodies should step in and see how much they can play. Thank you to all my panelists. I thank you, Pascal. I thank you, Chris Castin. I thank you, Tandeka. I thank you, Karen. I thank you, Michael. And I also thank you, Commissioner Maria. And I thank you, Karen, to everyone that has contributed to this conversation. Now, I want to take this opportunity to just open the floor for two people who have either a question or a comment regarding the conversation. And as you open up your microphone, I hope, Robert, that can be done, that they can open up the microphones. Robert? Okay, yes, you can. So please, you can unmute yourself, introduce yourself. If you have a question or comment, please go ahead, and you can even tell us how you think we can move forward. Yeah. Anyone? Let's see who will take the opportunity first. Okay, so as you do that, I want to, at this juncture, to make a call to action. So I want to propose that we have another meeting of this sort next week on Monday. We can agree to do it at the same time. And then we have a build-up conversation on how can we take forward whatever we've learned from here. How do we move forward to ensure that at least there's more advocacy, there's more lobbying, there's more changing of actually of the states. And I mean, I like the brilliant idea about the general comment, and I'm looking forward to having a further conversation with Commissioner Maria about this. So anyone? If you want to take part in that conversation, please feel free to go on and put your email in the chat option. We shall reach out to you early this week. I'm seeing there's a question here that, do you think more weight could be placed on the political agenda? Maybe looking at the population of the released to show the actual weight of the political agenda. So the whole question is all about whether we think, and I can put this question to Commissioner Maria, do you think we need this issue of the prisoners and us having the adoption of the protocol? Is it an issue that deals with us placing more weight on the political agenda? And then you can also share your thoughts on what do you think about the general comment?
Godfrey, I'm sorry, can you repeat your question?
The question is, the issue about improving the prisoners' rights and the adoption of the protocol, is this a question that deals with needing more weight to be placed on the political agenda?
Okay, 1 second.
I mean, as they translate for the commissioner, whoever has a comment, you can use the chat option to share your thoughts. Tandeka, Karen, anyone, all my panelists, please.
Obrigada, Godfrey. Eu acho, meu entender, que o painel teve painelistas muito competentes e que fizeram uma abordagem muito boa sobre a proteção dos direitos dos prisioneiros.
Thank you, Godfrey. The commissioner starts by saying, firstly, that the panelists, all of them have had very interesting takes on the prisoners' rights, and it was very insightful to hear that.
Por essa razão, eu olhei com muito interesse para o seu convite para a próxima segunda-feira, discutir a forma como devemos levar isto para frente. E eu entendo que uma das formas é continuarmos a discutir para encontrar as formas mais propícias e também outro aspecto muito importante para a troca de experiências, porque há experiências muito boas, por exemplo, na África do Oeste, que não, de certeza que não são as mesmas na África Ocidental ou na África Austral. Então, esta troca de informação deve envolver mais áreas de África.
So yeah, the commissioner takes very seriously your invite for next week. She finds it that it's really important that this conversation continues, and she believes that the way to move forward is in fact to continue to have these discussions in order to move forward, but also to share all of our experiences together and find obviously the solutions all around Africa, not just in particular areas.
Okay, obrigado, Commissioner, and we will sure reach out to you regarding this conversation. So, does any of the panelists want to ask, make a comment on the question that also was asked by one of the individuals with respect to whether we think that this is an issue that deals with the need of more weight to be placed on the political agenda? Anyone? Kirsten, I'll give you a chance. Kirsten?
Hi, I think, yes, and I think, for example, civil society actors and research-based institutions have a role to play here by creating awareness of the importance of prisoners' rights and being very strategic about it, because as I've mentioned before, it's not, prisoners' rights are not really prioritized because state actors would always think about, well, what about other people's rights? You know, we need to put them first. And why prisoners, you know, they create, they are criminals, you know. So I do think that the way in which civil society actors and NGOs and research-based institutions could do that is to be strategic in the way in which they engage the public and the politicians by perhaps one way to do this would be to say, if you reduce overcrowding or if you reduce policies that have implications of overcrowding, this could happen. It has a negative effect on the entire criminal justice system. It is expensive, and there are different ways to deal with incarceration of low-risk offenders. And this is what we've done specifically with the decriminalization of petty offense campaign. So the agenda needs to be put on the platforms of various regional panels and conversations, and it's up to us as civil society actors and research-based institutions to be strategic in the way in which we present the message, by making it look more favorable, which at the end of the day it is, because mass incarceration or has actually an entire negative effect on the socioeconomic impact on pretrial detainees, families, children, and if we can reduce that, that would be important. And also the lack of the prioritization of health rights within the prison setting has also devastating consequences, not only for the inmate, but also for the officials that work in prisons. And we've seen this with COVID-19, where, you know, there's been mass messages all over the world that we need to reduce overcrowded facilities by ensuring that low-risk offenders are being released, because it's not just about the inmates at the end of the day, it's also about the warders that are in the prison facilities that are looking after, you know, ensuring that prisoners are detained, but they go back into their societies, and then they also spread these such diseases or So I mean, yeah, that it is important, and like I said, we do have a role to play. Thank you.
Thank you so much. At this juncture, I want to ask if there's only one person who would like to unmute the microphone and ask a question before we close the session. Just one person. And also, I want to ask if those who are interested in being part of this conversation same time, we should please go ahead and, you know, at least include our emails in the chat option. Okay, so I want to thank you to my panelists. I want to thank all those who have attended from wherever you are. And I want to ask that let's keep this advocacy ongoing. At least for me, I had a couple of takeaways. One, that we need to do more of the lobbying with the political scene. Two, we need to change the mindset of the society. Three, there was a proposal, and I hope the commissioner took note of that, that perhaps it's now time that we should have a general comment from the African Commission dealing with the prisoners' rights. So this is something we should even have a conversation about next week. Next, that these civil society organizations and research-based institutions should be strategic in their lobbying mechanisms. But then Michael made a very important point as I close, that for those who have chance to litigate both the national courts and regional courts, please let's try to be strategic to ensure that we can be able to look at what rights we are seeking to have enforced specifically for the prisoners. At this point, I thank you all for joining this conversation, and I will reach out to all of you, and I look forward to having another meaningful engagement next week, same time. Thank you so much.